Let's move on to the next talk on donor-specific alloantibody and donor-derived cell-free DNA in transplantation. May I invite the speaker, Dr. Shruti Tapiwala. May I invite the chairpersons for this talk, Dr. Georgie K. Nainan, Dr. Girish MS, and Dr. Pranav Jha. Over to the chairpersons.
Good evening, everybody. At the very outset, let me thank Vivek Kutte for the invitation for all of us, Girish and Pranav and myself, for to chair this session. As ABMR is increasing, we have to detect it early and to predict it, and to have that we have a donor-specific alloantibody and donor-derived cell-free DNA in the transplantation field. And we have Shruti Tapiwala to give us a talk on this, and may I request Shruti to give her talk.
Thank you, chairpersons. I would like to thank the organizers and Dr. Kutte for giving me this opportunity. So we all know that HLA mismatches is a marker of immunological risk, and these are antibodies which, if mismatched, if against the mismatched HLA antigens expressed on the renal allograft, the donor-specific anti-HLA antibodies will induce an hyperacute, acute vascular and chronic rejections, which results in graft failure. These will also develop if they have blood transfusions, pregnancies, or previous transplants. But this is the crux of the matter, that the mismatched HLA antigens are an immunological risk for further events. Now, acute rejection or inflammation, importantly, less than 1 year post-transplantation in various studies have shown that the clinical rate of TCMR is 8 to 12%, ABMR is less than 15%, subclinical TCMR, that is T-cell mediated rejection, is 8 to 15%, subclinical antibody mediated rejection is less than 2%, subclinical inflammation, that is borderline, is 40%. This is a big number. Acute rejection more than 1 year post-transplantation is usually present in 15 to 20% of recipients. T-cell mediated rejection 10 to 15%, ABMR 5 to 8%, and acute rejection negatively impacts the long-term survival. These are usually with high DSAs, C1q complement binding positive, late ABMRs, mixed rejection because of non-adherence. So this is a mixed bag, but this is a big issue. There are studies which are showing that donor-specific antibodies with TCMR is associated with worse serum creatinine and worst allograft survival and impending allograft loss. ABMR is a major diagnostic and therapeutic challenge. This type of rejection usually presents as a continuous process of transplant injury, often subclinical at the time of diagnosis, like we saw the percentage of 40%, but associated with accelerated progression to graft failure once it is reaching a stage. For detection of ABMR, allograft biopsies are current gold standards, and in the last 2 decades, the Banff group has continuously refined and upgraded its diagnostic criteria. The Banff SCREAM includes the detection of circulating donor-specific antibodies as a key criteria. This is a famous diagram from Dr. Lupi and Jordan in 2012, which delineated that by the time we have a rise in creatinine, we are far ahead in the injury. So if you see, there are antibodies pre-transplant, there might be complement activation antibodies, it will cause an inflammation, endothelial injury, peritubular capillary inflammation, and there might be an acute rejection here versus there can be a chronic indolent AMR which is present. So it is now imperative that we understand if the graft is undergoing an injury at the very beginning, so that the injury can be taken under control and the graft dysfunction does not happen. So how do we usually monitor? I am a nephrologist also looking after an HLA lab. So I can see both the sides of the coin. How do we monitor the patients? Serum creatinine, commonest marker, but we all know it is insensitive because by the time the creatinine rises, the graft injury has already happened. Because for the creatinine to rise, you need an injury. You need the injury to start killing the glomeruli, and then the creatinine will go up. Drug levels. We want to monitor the drug levels to see whether people are non-adherent, to see whether there is a toxicity. But it is not a biomarker for graft damage, it is a surrogate marker. If I look at urine analysis, I will want to look at hematuria, proteinuria to understand if there is a graft damage. Imaging, Doppler. Again, a Doppler and a sonography will only give me a hint only when there is a big damage happening. The resistive indices will not go up till the injury has happened and the creatinine has risen. Protocol and for-cause biopsies. Now here also we will do biopsies only when the creatinine has gone up or we know that there is something which is out of the ordinary happening. Protocol biopsies become too cumbersome for patients because it is too invasive. HLA antibody monitoring. Now this was a big boom in the last 2 decades and it is still being considered because HLA antibody monitoring can still add to our diagnosis. It can still add to our monitoring. Immunotyping and genomics. This also was coming into picture, but it was realized that to do on a day-to-day basis was difficult. We do microbial monitoring like BK virus, CMV virus, EBV virus, but this is also a surrogate marker that we do not want these viruses to come and cause allograft injury. Now a little about HLA antibody monitoring, which Dr. Mehra has very elegantly shown us, that there are distinct DSA characteristics, including the mean fluorescent intensity, complement fixing capability, slightly improve the diagnostic performance of HLA single antigen bead assays, because these are the characteristics which tell me that is this antibody cytotoxic or no. A positive DSA result, however, has limited diagnostic accuracy and does not inevitably indicate an acute rejection process. There might be an antibody which is there in the system. It might not be complement activating. It might not be doing anything to the graft. So we cannot alter immunosuppression. A negative DSA with the absence of representation of the antigen or allele on the beads can occasionally mislead us thinking that there are no DSA, so we should not look at rejection. We should monitor these 3 to 6 monthly because repeated assessments tell us the antibody waxing and waning in the circulation. Few may get added with every stimulus and exposure to a foreign antigen. So it is not enough to measure it once. Nevertheless, there is still unmet need for monitoring tools that accurately predict the presence or absence of rejection or an ongoing graft injury. So what is cell-free DNA? This is something which has recently in the last 3 years come up on the radar of immunological monitoring of an allograft. So a little about this. A cell-free DNA is found in serum, plasma, urine, saliva, feces, and peritoneal fluid in all the fluids of the body, originates from the cells which undergo cell death. When our cell dies, the DNA is released. Apoptotic cells, necrotic cells, they will release the double standard DNA, coding and non-coding genomic DNA. DNA degrades into the nucleosomal units, primarily 160 to 200 BPs. Cleared from the blood by liver and the kidney, half-life is 30 minutes. So this is the prima facie of what is a cell-free DNA. Now, if I want to measure the cell-free DNA, and I'm thinking that the allograft is having an injury, the cells are becoming apoptotic, or the cells of the allograft, which is a foreign organ in the system, is having an injury, the cell death is going to release DNA into the circulation. If I am able to assess the cell-free DNA with a single multiplex PCR followed by sequencing to determine the fraction of donor-specific nucleotides, then I will be able to understand if there is an allograft injury or not. And in the initial study by the kit maker and by a few research scientists, they found that this donor-derived cell-free DNA will increase when the allograft is undergoing an inflammation or an injury with an immunological event, and it will decrease when there is a quiescence. So this was the basis of trying to understand if this is going to help us in immunological monitoring or no. So this was the first study and a landmark study which brought this molecule or which brought this technology into limelight. So this was the DART study, Diagnosing Acute Rejection in Kidney Transplant Recipients, a prospective study. This was a study from April of 2015 to May 2016, and there were some 384 renal transplant patients which were enrolled, 245 within the first 3 months of kidney transplantation and 139 at the time of indicated biopsies from 14 clinical sites. So it's a multicentric study. After transplantation, the blood was collected at time of scheduled surveillance visits at months 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, and 12, or at the time of each kidney allograft biopsy, up to the follow-up samples within 8 weeks of a kidney allograft biopsy. The objective of the primary statistical analysis was to determine whether the donor-derived cell-free DNA in the patient's plasma can discriminate active rejection from no active rejection allograft status in patients clinically indicated for biopsy as determined by pathologist's renal biopsy reading. Secondary analysis included comparisons of donor-derived cell-free DNA performance in discriminating biopsy-based diagnosis of ABMR from all other samples that did not have a biopsy evidence of ABMR. So this was a well-designed study. So what did they find? This was found that in patients with clinical suspicion of acute rejection, active rejection, the common cause for the clinical suspicion and active rejection, the cell-free DNA got elevated to more than 1%. So that was the cutoff which was designed. They also found that the rise in creatinine with an active rejection was correlating well with the cell-free DNA levels. And in this study, AlloSure kit was used. Hence, AlloSure is written over here. There are 2 kits available in the world. Both the kits have a comparative study, which is head-to-head, but this study used AlloSure. Then there was an analysis which tried to understand whether the antibody-mediated rejection and the cell-mediated rejection, did it have the same response to the cell-free DNA? And they found that the donor-derived cell-free DNA levels are higher in antibody-mediated rejection than in T-cell mediated rejection. And that is what this graph is showing, that if you have a chronic active ABMR, you have an active ABMR, the cell-free DNA levels are definitely more than 1%, but a TCMR, the cell-free DNA is less than 1%, and it might miss a rejection event. Again, you are comparing no active rejections, you are comparing TCMR1A to TCMR1B, and you find that the severity of TCMR will add to increasing the donor-derived cell-free DNA. But if you have an early cell-mediated rejection, it would not be picked up by a cell-free DNA assessment. Then the next step was to find out whether only a rejection event is causing the cell-free DNA rise, or it is any other things like toxic nephropathies, or like any other reasons like BK virus, transplant glomerulopathies. All these things were studied, and they found that the donor-derived cell-free DNA will rise above 1% only when there is an immunological event. They did not find the rise when there was a toxic nephropathy, or when there was a BKV virus induced nephropathy, or there was only an ATN. So that also told them that the cell-free DNA would be an acceptable marker to monitor immunologically. They found a negative predictive value of 95% for active rejection. So this was a very important finding. The sensitivity was 85%, the specificity was 33%, the prevalence of donor-derived cell-free DNA more than 1% was 10% in the population. And this is what told them that this will be a good marker. This is an extension of that. Samples with increased cell-free DNA of more than 1% occurred significantly more often in the following types of rejections and sub-elements with a significant p-value: acute or active ABMR, chronic active ABMR, any moderate microvascular inflammation, mild inflammation is not there, linear C4D staining in peritubular capillaries, which means that the complement is already activated, presence of donor-specific antibodies, discriminated type 1b of TCMR and TG, because in 1b TCMR the cell-free DNA would be negative, but in TG, which is a chronic allograft nephropathy or a immune dysfunction, it would come positive. The median level of donor-derived cell-free DNA in patients with active rejections significantly higher in comparison to the comparator group of biopsy specimens which did not have any active rejections. The median levels were like 2.9% in ABMR, 1.2% in TCMR only, and types 1 and 1B and 2A, 0.2% in TCMR, which is a mild one, and the grade 1. Now, after the DART study, multiple studies started coming across which tried to see whether cell-free DNA is going to be working. So they tried looking at the same parameters to diagnose ABMR versus no ABMR. So now they were also trying to look at whether the ABMR is correlating with the DSA positivity and the cell-free DNA levels. And in this study with Dr. Jordan from 2018 showed that yes, it was correlating with the donor-derived cell-free DNA at 1% to detect an active ABMR in DSA positive patient with a negative predictive value of 83%. Positive predictive value for DSA is positive alone was 48%. Patients with donor-derived cell-free DNA positive and DSA positive results have a high probability of active ABMR, which is no-brainer that you have a DSA positive, you have a rejection happening, you have a cell-free DNA which is coming positive. It will be a high probability. And this study concluded that combined use of donor-derived cell-free DNA and DSA testing may improve the non-invasive diagnosis of active ABMR in kidney transplant patients. So this was a little more one step ahead to refine the conclusion. Again, the same thing by two other studies showing that donor-derived cell-free DNA was useful to assess ABMR from non-ABMR within the DSA positive group. So if you have a DSA positive but the cell-free DNA was negative, less likely that there will be an ABMR, and it correlated. Now, there was another study known as RADAR, where the donor-derived cell-free DNA may risk stratify patients with borderline or TCMR1A identified on biopsy with more than 0.5%. So the level was brought down to 0.5%, which is a little risky because you might then overdiagnose the presence of cell-free DNA. Same way, it suggested a new standard for reassessing the donor-derived cell-free DNA levels and reinforces the main importance of monitoring the changes. Now, this is very important. They are saying not a one time, but a monitoring will tell us whether it is actually progressing or no. Next two studies are to monitor the rejection treatment. So once you have diagnosed, how do you know that the treatment is okay and the graft is doing well? In the old times and till now, if I want to assess the allograft for a recovery, I might do a renal biopsy after 4 to 6 weeks of treatment if the creatinine has not come down. But they are suggesting that with these kits, with the cell-free DNA kits, if we are monitoring the donor-derived cell-free DNA levels, then a reduction in the donor-derived cell-free DNA will be correlated with improvement in the graft function and treatment of the rejection. But a rebound increase in the donor-derived cell-free DNA post-treatment is a poor prognostic factor because it means that the allograft injury is still ongoing and we still need to work on the treatment of antibody-mediated rejection. The DART study retrospective analysis also showed that donor-derived cell-free DNA may be useful as a dynamic biomarker to assess the health of the renal allograft following a rejection treatment. But that means that we will be trying to do the cell-free DNA every few months or every week to try and find out what is happening to the allograft. And this was retrospectively studied in the DART.
Dr. Shruti, you have to wind up.
I'm winding up.
Yes.
No problem. So, to summarize, one interesting biomarker reflecting an active transplant injury may be the detection of donor-derived cell-free DNA. Studies have demonstrated that it is correlating with the creatinine rise, it is correlating with a drop in GFR, it is correlating with the treatment of rejection. But now let me show you the other end. If I match all the studies, the sensitivity of this test is only 55 to 90%. Specificity is only 44 to 93%. Positive predictive value is only 9 to 81%, and look at the range. And the negative predictive value is 83 to 98. So I am only attracted to the last line, negative predictive value 83 to 98%. And that means that it is an injury marker, not an alloimmune marker. The cost involved, and this I will be grateful for Dr. Hariharan because he shared these data. The cost involved is using an NGS setup, which is very costly. Per test estimated run cost in USA is $2,800 per test. So if we are not even thinking of doing SAB in our patients because it is costly, this seems to be out of reach for at least our set of patients presently. It can identify ABMR, not TCMR, can identify a high-grade TCMR grade B, cannot tell us acute versus chronic because it is just going to be positive, but can identify quiescence, that there is nothing happening, it is negative. The negative predictive value is very good. Immunosuppression cannot be altered based on cell-free DNA. And newer technologies, we require time testing to use it at bedside. Cost effectiveness with the cell-free DNA and the ease of setting up in the laboratories seem to be a challenge because I myself have tried to set it up, but it seems to be a very costly affair. A composite analysis, like Dr. N.K. Mehra pointed out, a clinical pathological correlation, clinical progress of the patient, HLA antibody monitoring, drug levels, renal allograft biopsy still remain dependable to treat a patient when there is an event. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shruti, very much. As we are running short of time, may I request Girish and then Pranav to give quick comments, please. Girish.
Thank you, Shruti Madam. That was a wonderful talk. So made us a little wiser with the use of donor-derived cell-free DNA. So, and you have rightly pointed out regarding the non-practicality of that in the recent future. But it makes us look into this aspect and something to look forward to, at least for the negative predictive value for those patients who are at high risk for biopsy. Definitely, whether to do or not, this might answer as one of those questions. Thank you for your wonderful talk, ma'am.
Yes, Dr. Pranav.
Yeah, I think very well summarized, and it's a new kid on the block, and still a long way to go. I think the cost and the usefulness still remains a factor, as very well told by Dr. Shruti. Even if the negative predictive value is high, but then if we are thinking of waiting for even DSA, we don't have money. Then combining these two and subsequent monitoring every time is going to be costly affair. So I just one question: whether we have, I heard this test is available in India, and what's the cost? Is it at par with DSA?
So it is at par with the single antigen bead assay. It is available in India, and the cost of a single antigen bead assay is anywhere between 25 to 30,000, or say depending on the lab, 21 to 25,000 is what I can say for one class single antigen bead assay, and that is projected to be the cost of this test. And mind you, because next gen sequencer is required to assess the DNA presence, only centers which are going to be very high volume using NGS, where they are doing bone marrows, they are doing genetic tests. So one run of an NGS requires 75,000 of a basic kit. Then you need 100 samples to be run so that you make it cost effective. So it is a very elaborate affair to get a cell-free DNA. So I am practically trying to see, which center is going to be able to afford that much and which of our patients are going to afford it. Unless, the kits become or the NGS becomes cheaper to use.
Thank you, Dr. Shruti. As we are running short of time, let us close this session. Thank Girish and Pranav also for the active participation. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Shruti. I also thank the chairpersons for chairing the session.